Okay, so you're tuning in, you're busy, you want the important stuff fast.
Right.
That's the idea.
That's good, because that's what we do. Today, we're going to dive into something you've probably heard buzzing around nanoplastics, but maybe the why and how isn't totally clear.
Exactly. And we're grounding this conversation in some really significant new research. It's a study that just came out in Nature Communications.
Okay.
Yeah, led by a team at Columbia engineering professors Sanat Kumar, Michael Bukovsky, and Charo Gonzalez-Bukovsky.
Right.
And their work gives us a fresh look at why these tiny, tiny plastic bits are showing up basically everywhere.
So our mission for this deep dive, really, is to get under the hood, understand why these nanoplastics are even forming in the first place. And honestly, the reason they found is, well, it's kind of surprising.
It is a bit counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's baked right into the plastics we use constantly. A real, oh, that's how it works moment, potentially. Absolutely. And figuring this out isn't just, academically interesting. It's crucial for understanding the environmental side, of course.
Yeah.
But maybe even potential impacts on our own health down the line.
Okay, let's do it. So nanoplastics, we know they're out there, but this study really hammers home just how pervasive they are now. It's way beyond just like seeing a plastic bottle on the beach.
That's a really key point.
Yeah.
The research stresses that these particles are incredibly small. We're talking, in some cases, smaller than a virus.
Smaller than a virus? Wow.
Yeah, and they've been found pretty much everywhere scientists have looked. Think about that, from, pristine Antarctic snow.
Right.
To human blood, our own bloodstreams. It really paints a picture of, complete global spread.
That's almost hard to wrap your head around. And it brings up this kind of paradox, right? We love plastic because it's durable, it lasts forever, it's flexible, versatile. But it seems like those exact qualities are maybe part of the problem here.
That's a very sharp way to put it, yeah. The study points out that the very things making plastics useful are intrinsically linked to how they break down into these tiny nanoscale pieces eventually. They specifically looked at something called semi-crystalline polymers, which, get this, make up something like 75 to 80% of all plastics produced.
Whoa, okay, so not some niche material. This is the common stuff.
Exactly. Your everyday plastic.
So semi-crystalline polymers sounds a bit technical. What's special about their structure? Why do they break down this way? Is this the brick-and-mortar thing I read about?
That's precisely the analogy they use, and it's quite helpful. If you could zoom way, way in on this type of plastic, you wouldn't see something uniform. You'd see these alternating zones. You have very ordered, tightly packed, kind of rigid areas. Those are the crystalline layers. The bricks, if you will.
Okay, bricks, got it.
And then between those, you have softer, more jumbled up, amorphous layers. That's the mortar.
Right, holding the bricks together. Makes sense.
Exactly. And it's that combination, that connection between the hard bricks and the softer mortar that gives the plastic its overall properties, its strength, flexibility, all that.
Okay.
But, and this is this crucial part the research uncovered, that structure also have a kind of built-in weakness at this tiny scale.
Okay, so we've got bricks, we've got mortar. What actually causes it to crumble into these nanoparticles? What did the Columbia team discover there?
Well, what's really interesting, and maybe a bit alarming, is that it doesn't necessarily need big physical forces, like being crushed in a landfill or churned in the ocean for ages. The study shows the breakdown actually starts in those softer amorphous layers, the mortar, just regular environmental exposure. Think UV light from the sun, temperature changes, maybe some chemical reactions.
And ambient stuff.
Pretty much. Over time, these factors weaken and degrade those softer connecting regions.
So like you said, the mortar just kind of starts to crack and fall apart from like everyday wear and tear, even if the wall itself isn't being knocked down.
That's a perfect analogy. And here's the kicker. When those soft connections weaken and fail, those hard crystalline fragments, bricks, they're not held together anymore. They basically just detach, break off, and scatter into the environment.
Okay, so the connections go, and the little hard bits are set free, and those are the nanoplastics.
Microplastics, yeah, those are the fragments. And the study really emphasizes that these crystalline bits are way more durable than the soft stuff that let go.
Right.
They resist breaking down further, which explains why they can hang around in the environment for, potentially centuries. Leading to this buildup, this long-term pollution issue.
Which, brings us right to the the really worrying part. Health impacts. We're talking particles so small they can mess with us on a cellular level.
That's the critical question now, isn't it? What actually happens when these nanoparticles get into biological systems,
Yeah.
like our bodies? The researchers point out their size means they could potentially slip through cell membranes, get inside our cells, maybe even interact with things like DNA in the cell nucleus.
Inside the cells. That sounds quite bad. The study even mentions a comparison to asbestos, which we know is linked to really serious diseases.
Yeah, comparison is definitely made, and it's sobering. They suggest that because nanoplastics can have similar sizes and shapes, sometimes fibrous, like asbestos, there's a potential link to things like cancer or cardiovascular issues, heart disease, stroke.
Okay, potential link. Important distinction.
Absolutely vital. This isn't saying nanoplastics cause these diseases definitively. It's saying, based on how similar particles behave, this is a risk we need to investigate very, very thoroughly. We need much more research on the direct health effects.
Right. Understood. Potential risk needs more study. But the possibility alone, based on particle behavior, is definitely enough to make you sit up and pay attention. And this whole thing, it shines a new light on recycling too, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, the study doesn't focus on recycling policy, but it implicitly highlights a major issue. We recycle a pretty small fraction of plastics currently.
Yeah, we know that. It's often cheaper just to make new plastic.
Exactly. The economics often don't favor recycling, but if you start factoring in this nanoplastic formation,
And the potential future health costs that could come from all this exposure.
right, then suddenly the cost-benefit analysis might look, well, quite different.
The cost of not recycling, of letting these nanoparticles constantly generate, maybe that cost, including healthcare burdens down the road, is actually way higher than investing in better recycling now.
Precisely. The research findings kind of bolster the argument for prioritizing and really investing in better, more efficient recycling systems. It forces us to weigh that immediate cost against potentially massive long-term societal and health expenses.
So, okay, this basic structure of most plastics leads almost inevitably, it sounds like, to making these nanoplastics. Is there any way out at the source? Did the researchers suggest anything about, like, making plastics differently?
Yes, they did offer a potential path forward, which is encouraging.
Okay.
Based on their findings about the weak mortar, they suggest that focusing on engineering those softer, amorphous layers could be key.
Strengthening the mortar itself.
Exactly. If material scientists could develop soft components that are much more resistant to breaking down from UV light, temperature, etc.,
Then maybe the bricks wouldn't detach so easily, or at least not as quickly.
that's the hope.
Yeah.
It could significantly reduce how many of these hard crystalline fragments get released in the first place. It's about tackling the problem right at the material design level.
Right. Okay, so wrapping this up for you, the listener, the big takeaway here is that the way most common plastics are built, this brick-and-mortar structure, it inherently leads to these tiny, persistent, and potentially worrying nanoplastics forming. And we now have a clearer picture of how that happens.
And that aha moment, perhaps, is realizing it's not just about big stuff breaking down slowly over decades. It's this specific weakness, this vulnerability in the plastic's molecular architecture that causes it to shed these nanofragments almost by design in a way.
Yeah, like a microscopic self-destruct sequence triggered by just existing in the environment. So here's a thought to leave you with. Building on that recycling point, knowing what we've just discussed about how persistent these nanoplastics are and their potential impacts, how might our view of the real cost of all this convenient plastic need to change? Something to chew on.